Read On is a 48-month European project which is being delivered through 7 partner organisations across 6 EU countries: Ireland, Italy, Norway, Portugal, Spain and the United Kingdom. Activities include reading programmes, creative writing, interviewing, literature and cultural identity, graphic novels, illustration, training for professionals, audience development and multimedia. The project commenced in June of 2017. The Irish component of the project will be delivered by West Cork Music, and training for this activity was provided by Graffitti Theatre. Read On is undertaken to support the Creative Europe programme of the European Union and the Arts Council. Due to COVID-19, this has been moved online.
Lovely. Thank you, Grace, for introducing the project. Welcome, Kelly. How are you?
I'm grand. Thanks for having me. It's lovely to see you all.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Julie and I'm Creative Learning Coordinator for Graffitti Theatre Company. And so this week I've been working with the participants to read the book, Flying Tips for Flightless Birds, to do a little bit of interview training as well, and just to kind of have a bit of fun. It's been great. And we've been working alongside Caitlin.
Hey, I'm Caitlin. This is not my book, it's Kelly. I'm a local YA writer who wrote Tuesdays Are Just As Bad. I was interviewed by Read On last year, and I am happy this year to help help the team interview authors. So I'll leave it to them.
Lovely. Thanks, Caitlin. And so, Kelly, today Sarah and Aoife are going to take the interview. So they'll kind of proceed with that now, and then afterwards we'll kind of open it up to the rest of us for a chat.
Hi, Kelly. So it's so lovely to meet you, and thanks for being here despite all the madness that's going on.
Thanks for having me.
So to kick things off, we would love it if you don't mind. Would you be able to read an excerpt from your book?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I have one here that's really short, and it's about Finch and Birdie's Trapeze Act. So as you know, Finch and Birdie are a trapeze act, and they are in a long family line of trapeze twins. Their great mother and her twin were also a trapeze act. And so this one's about Finch and Birdie. We've only ever tried one trick without a safety net. It was last winter, and Dad had decided the net was looking tired. So he ordered a new one, and we took the old one down the night before it was due to arrive. Birdie and I were in the warehouse alone, tidying up after the Tuesday acrobats, when I noticed her standing under the trapeze and looking up, chewing her lip. The Franconi twins did everything without a net, she said, as I came to stand beside her. Yeah, and look what happened to them. We don't know what happened. It might not have been an accident at all. It might have been deliberate. And that's better, she shrugged. It would mean they didn't make a mistake. Then she turned and raised an eyebrow at me. Dare you, she said. I raised my eyes to the top of the rigging. Without the net hanging halfway between it and the ground, it seemed higher than ever. Mum would murder us. She won't know, just a simple catch. When was the last time we missed a basic catch? Exactly, we're probably due. Rubbish, and we'd be able to say we'd performed without a net, just like the Franconi twins. Not too like them, preferably. Go on, Finch, it'll be me in the air anyway. All you have to do is catch. Yeah, so it's my fault if you pancake. She was already heading for the ladder. It'll be fine, she called, and I followed her, because that's what I do. Before I reached the top, she'd already swung out and landed on the far platform. She sent the bar back to me, I caught it, and we stood facing each other. She seemed very far away, but I could make out her grin. Wait, I called, as she lifted the bar on her side. I applied a hefty amount of chalk dust to my hands, which were beginning to sweat like a beginner's. She did the same. One catch, I yelled. Basic knee-hang grab, no funny business, no somersaults, I'm serious, Birdie. Okay, Dad. I swung out on the bar. I don't look down when I'm up in the trapeze, there's no need, but I couldn't help noticing that something was missing from my peripheral vision as I flipped over to hook my knees around the bar. That blurred expanse of white hovering below us was gone, and the concrete floor looked grey and hard and very, very far away. All at once I realised how big a psychological effect the net has. It keeps you calm. It doesn't just stop you from hitting the ground, it stops you from falling in the first place, because you're not worried, you're not sweating, you're not thinking about the distance beneath you. You perform flawlessly, and you think you don't need a net. You don't need it because it's there. Birdie was swinging faster and faster, hanging by her knees, and we were starting to synchronize. If I had a penny for every time we've done this catch, I'd be loaded, but suddenly it felt like the very first time. My arms felt weak, my hands like boneless dough. I started to second guess the position of my knees, which way my palms should face. I wanted to call it all off, but Birdie was hurtling towards me, stretching out her hands, and this was the one. I reached out automatically, saw her legs unfold, her body start to drop. As she left the bar, there was a huge bang as every light in the warehouse went out and we were plunged into darkness. I had a split second to find her.
That was lovely. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. So I guess our first question to you would be, did you always know you wanted to write?
Yes, I think I did. Because I always love stories. And I think when I was about 6, I told my parents that I wanted to be a writer. And they kind of sucked through their teeth and were like, that's a bad idea. Writers don't make any money. You don't want to do that. And like I was 6, all I meant was I wanted to write stories. I hadn't kind of associated it with money or careers, you know, and I was thinking, what are you talking about? And I think that's a bit sad, actually, that if you have an interest in anything, like even as a tiny child, people's first reaction is like, you know, well, can you make a career out of this? Are you going to make money out of this? And if it's not going to make money, then what's the point in doing it? Which is not the point at all. And I think I realized quite young that people were going to react like that. And it's why I completely shut up about wanting to be a writer. I never told anybody after that I wrote, because I didn't want them to pity me, because I thought if I told them I liked writing, they were going to look at me and think, oh, you know, she wants to be J.K. Rowling, that's so pathetic, and just like laugh at me. And it wasn't about that at all, but like admitting that you like to write was like admitting to these, you know, grand career ambitions, which it was not what it was about at all. And I think it's quite sad that we sort of teach even young kids to think that way about their interests and their hobbies. Because let me tell you, if you like writing, you do not have to be published to enjoy writing, and you do not have to make money from it. And in fact, if you'll probably enjoy your hobbies more if you're not relying on them to pay your bills. So it is perfectly okay to just do something because you love it. So that was a very long answer to your question, which the short answer was yes.
That was such great advice. So I'm just wondering, because obviously the whole story revolves around the circus, which was so unique to read about. I hadn't read anything like that before. So I was just wondering why you chose the circus. Maybe you have any juggling experience yourself.
I was given juggling balls when I was 16, and I still have them, and I'm not very good at it. Yeah, no, I love the circus. I've never been in one, but I always love watching them. We went to Las Vegas when I was a tiny kid, and we stayed in a hotel called Circus, and this place had a 24-hour circus going on in the middle of the hotel, like all day and all night, which is completely bizarre. Las Vegas is very strange. But as a kid, you know, I thought that was amazing, and the trapeze artists I just loved, so I think that stayed with me. And I just like, there's something about like the ethos of circuses, you know, because they're traditionally these places that welcome outsiders, people who don't fit in anywhere else. This is why people run away to join the circus, because they will welcome you when nobody else will, and they're not judgmental, and I really like that about them. So it seemed like a really good atmosphere to put a story in.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I guess the book is, it's an amazing book, and it deals with a lot of important issues in a lighthearted yet sensitive way. So I guess I was wondering if this was hard to achieve or if it came naturally to you.
I think I would have found it difficult to do it any other way, because I feel like that's just real life. Like everybody has, you know, big issues that they're carrying around with them, but we don't walk around, you know, being, you know, really kind of deep and introspective 24/7. You know, we make jokes and we have banter and we get on with our lives, because if you didn't, you'd go mad. And that's maybe all a defense mechanism and a way of dealing with it, but that's just what we do. So I felt like if I had a character who was just really sad all the time, you know, it wouldn't feel realistic. That's not real life. And I don't think it would be as effective either, because if you have a character who's just like a big whinge for 300 pages, like you might feel sorry for them, but you're going to get a bit fed up with them. And also you're not going to feel sad for them, because you can't keep up 300 pages worth of sadness yourself. You're going to get bored with that. Whereas if you have a character who's quite kind of upbeat and lighthearted, and then something bad happens to them and just floors them, then your reader's really going to feel that because of the contrast. And then if they pick themselves up and make a joke, like pretending they're okay, then that will just break your heart. So I think it's a much more effective way of getting your reader to feel something for your character than just have them be sad all the time.
So the book covers a huge range of themes, which was something I really noticed as I was reading it. But a main one really is family, and the Franconis are such a tight-knit bunch. Is that something that you wanted to emphasize, or is that something that you have experience of yourself?
I don't know that I was consciously thinking about it while I was writing it, but I do come from quite a close family. But family really interests me. I think that family and schools are brilliant environments for stories because you get no choice in either of them. And you're just forced to interact with these people who you may or may not have anything in common with, and you may or may not even like, but you can't walk away from them. They're just there and you have to deal with them. So I think there's limitless material for stories in families and schools. So and that's why I'm drawn to both.
That's actually a very good point. I never really thought of that before. So I guess I was wondering, were any of the characters based off real life, and did you grow up in a small town like in the story?
I grew up in the suburbs, but I went to school in a sort of a rural area, and it was quite a big school, but it was all kids who came in from other small rural towns, and it was probably a lot more conservative than a school in a city might have been. And like there was zero diversity, like none. I think in my entire year, there was one person of color and there was one Catholic. And everybody knew who the Catholic was, because if you were different in any way, you know, you really stood out. So it was that kind of environment. So I don't think Finch would have fared well in my high school in the late 90s. But the characters weren't supposed to be based on anybody. I didn't realize this while I was writing them, but afterwards I realized that I am basically Finch and my husband is basically Hector. It was not intentional, but like I would be quite sort of wary of people and a bit standoffish, whereas my husband is really geeky and shy, but really warm and brave and just like a really good person. He's very Hector. And I had the weirdest experience while I was writing the book, because you know the scene where Hector rescues the bee in the playground?
Yeah.
So I wrote that scene and no one had seen it. I hadn't told anyone about it. I hadn't shown it to anybody. My husband hadn't seen it. And 2 days later, we drove into work and we parked the car and we were walking across the car park. And my husband suddenly went, oh, there's a bee on the ground and he's exhausted. You guard him, I'll go and get some sugar. And he ran off to his office and came back with like a saucer with sugar and water on it. And I'm just standing there with like my mouth hanging open, like, am I being filmed? Is this a joke? Like, it was, no one had seen it and it happened exactly the way I had written it. It was so bizarre. It was like Twilight Zone bizarre. So I think at that point I started to realize that Hector was my husband.
That's so funny. Like you said yourself, Finch is a very unique person in many different ways. Is like promoting individuality something that you think is important when writing young adult or children's novels?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's really important, and I think it's basically what young adult fiction does. I think in one way or another, it's all about that. I think it's all about finding out who you are, and being that person, and learn to think for yourself. Because all that is what's happening in your teenage years. You're finding out who you are, and at the same time, you've got this outside pressure to conform and to do what you're told. So there's this tension. I think people can be a wee bit sniffy about YA, and they say like it's all navel gazing and self-obsessed and stuff. But I think, you know, it's the first period in your life where you're getting to make your own decisions and find out who you are. So of course that's going to be a major preoccupation, and I think it's a good thing, because if you learn how to think for yourself when you're young, then you're going to be a much nicer and happier adult. So I think it's a good thing.
That was very well put. Thank you so much. So I guess the next question would be, did you ever have any different ideas for the plot?
Yeah, I did. this book, like this version of it, took about a year to write, but it was resurrected out of a different version that I had been writing years and years before. So I mean, the whole thing took about 10 years, but I had this earlier version of it, and when I think back to how different it was, like it had a female main character, it had ghosts and a haunted house and a ghost hunter, it had a divorce and a suicide and a murder and an eating disorder and a dead sister. Like, completely different book. Literally the only things that were the same were the circus family background. And when I came back and rewrote it, because Finch just kind of popped into my head one day and that changed everything. And I chucked out the entire, I'd written like 50,000 words, chucked them in the bin. I kept 1,000 words and 2 characters who were Lou and Hector, and the circus family background, but everything else went. I think like beginning writers are quite surprised by how many drafts a book will go through and how many changes. Like, that was extreme, but there are a lot of changes before you get to the finished version. But I think it's a really good thing, because like when you've written your first draft and you're looking at it and going, oh my God, this is awful, I'm a terrible writer, I should just quit, which every writer does. You have to remember that your first draft bears no resemblance to the thing that will actually get published. And, you know, it's the process of getting from one to the other is what writing is all about. It's not about writing a perfect first draft, because nobody does that.
Yeah, so as we're talking about your writing process, do you have a very like rigid writing process? Do you try and write every day, or is it more flexible?
I write every day. I don't. But I like to write during the day. I can't write at night. Like, it gets to about 6 o'clock and I'm just a zombie. I can't do anything in the evening. And I write in the garden. I sit in my garden and write. If it rains, I put the parasol up and sit under there like a little cat under a tree. And it's in the winter, I have hot water bottles strapped to me. I just can't concentrate inside. And I like to have whole days kind of blocked off to write. Because if I get up in the morning and I know I'm going to have to leave the house at some point, then my brain just decides, no, today's a write-off. So I try, if I can, to block off a whole day. But it's not always possible, and if life gets busy, you have to be disciplined enough to just sit down and do it when you can.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So again, I suppose on the writing process and writing this book, did you have to do a lot of research when you were writing it?
The research is quite fun because it was all about circuses, or mostly about circuses. So it was all like reading about circus history and Victorian freak shows and watching circus performers on YouTube and calling it work. That was all pretty good. And it fed into the story quite a lot. I find research really helpful for like developing plots. Like, if you're stuck in your story, go and do some research on the topic, because something will leap out at you. Like, I was reading about like lion taming and the history of lion taming, and I was thinking about, like, you know, like lions are these ferociously dangerous creatures, but in a circus, they've somehow managed to convince a lion that it has to do what it's told by this, you know, puny human with a whip. And I'm thinking, like, why don't these lions realize that, you know, they could just destroy this guy if they wanted? And that led me to thinking, well, about Finch and the way that he and Kitty kind of snipe at each other, but he never really stands up to her, because in his head he believes that she's the powerful one. But it's only after he reads Birdie's blog post where she makes this kind of hint about people believing that they're not as powerful as they really are, the way lions have kind of been brainwashed to think that they're not really powerful. And after he reads that, he and Kitty have this showdown, and he really stands up to her for the first time and tells her what he thinks of her. So that whole scene came out of the research about the lions. So that's what I mean about being really helpful. And the other research I did was just about like bullying and homophobia in schools and stuff. And that was not as fun reading, unfortunately, but had to be done. But it was really interesting as well, because like when I started the book, I was thinking, you know, do we really need another book about homophobic bullying and coming out? You know, surely things have moved on and all the kids I know are so lovely. You know, does this really happen? But when I went and looked at, you know, the statistics and the stories, and yeah, it really does still happen, and we do still need books like this. and the fact that the statistics are probably just the tip of the iceberg, because a lot of it must go under the radar. I mean, just by the nature of it, I think the kids who are the most vulnerable are the kids who are easy targets, because they can't go and talk to an adult about this because maybe they're afraid of being outed, or they're ashamed that it's happening to them, or whatever. But you know, there must be so much more to it than just what the statistics report. So so doing that research kind of encouraged me to keep writing the book.
Yeah, I think that really shone through when you're writing. It felt really realistic when you were reading it.
Thank you.
I'd love if we could talk about the title of the book, Flying Tips for Flightless Birds. So it's very poetic, but it's such a like fun play on words as well. Did you come up with that early on, or?
I did, yeah, and I can't even remember coming up with it, so it was just there. But I really like the title, because I think it just sums up like this idea of doing the impossible, or doing something out of your comfort zone, or something that no one thought you could ever do. And I think that's what Finch and Hector spend the whole book doing, is just doing things that they never thought they could. And that's the kind of character that I really like. I don't really like writing characters who are naturally brilliant at everything. I like the characters who are a bit rubbish, but who persevere and find their own weird way to succeed. So I thought the title kind of summed that up.
Yeah, I really enjoyed how, you know, Hector, when he was learning all the circus skills, it was really like funny, and I really enjoyed how he kind of kept going and was very dedicated.
I love that.
So I guess the next question, I was wondering why you chose to narrate Brady through blog or indirect speech, and why did you base the novel on Finch's perspective?
Well, the blog was partly to give Brady a voice in the story, and partly as a way to give all that information about circuses without having just like a massive info dump. So it was structurally quite useful. But the main reason that she uses it is that she's trying to, the blog posts are supposed to be about circus history, but she's really using them as like a sneaky way to say some things to Finch that he doesn't want to hear, and she's too afraid to say to him, about her feelings about the circus and her role in it. So she's kind of doing that. And I blog myself all the time, and I think it's an interesting phenomenon of the internet, that even though it's so public, it can feel easier to say something online than to say something to someone's face. Like, it feels a bit more anonymous, even though it's completely not. So I think she finds it easier to do it that way. But the rest of the book is Finch's, because he is the main character to me. He always was, and his behavior is really dictated by his perception of everybody else, rightly or wrongly. So I wanted the reader to be in his head and to, you know, find out what was going on with everyone else at the same rate that he does. But you can also see, I think, the times where he's kind of lying to himself or deluding himself. But I wanted the reader to be with him.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading parts of Finch that he didn't really know about himself. You just wanted to like say it to him to his face. So this is your first novel, and obviously, like you were saying, it seems like it was a long process. How did it feel to have your book published and to have people read it?
Very scary. I was very private about my writing, and I hadn't let anybody see it. So, you know, the idea of that was terrifying. But it went really well, and people are really kind. And, you know, a good tip is that people will only say nice things to your face, and they will generally only tag you in good reviews, not bad ones. So if you just refuse to look at Goodreads and Amazon reviews, then you can go through life believing that everybody loves your book. So I recommend just doing that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your book for one anyway, and congrats on all the awards you've won with it. It's pretty phenomenal.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to know, do you ever get writer's block? And if you do, how do you deal with it?
Yes, I get it all the time. And I deal with it by having 3 or 4 novels on the go at once. I always have several on the go. So when I get stuck with one, I just move over and I tinker with the other one for a while. So I'm always abandoning things and then coming back to them months later, which is why it takes me forever to get to the end of something. And some of them don't get finished at all. But yeah, I get stuck really easily. But I think if you are having writer's block, you know, don't wreck yourself pushing it. You know, I think there's definitely something to be said for, you know, if you're not in the mood, make yourself sit down and have a go anyway, because sometimes that's when you get your best ideas. And you're like, if I hadn't sat down here, I would never have had that idea. So definitely try. But if you've tried and it's just not working, then, you know, don't wreck yourself over it. Go and do something else and do something creative. Because like you have this creative well, and it's what you draw on to produce your writing. And if all you do is draw on the well and you never put anything in, then there'll be nothing left. You know, you have to have a life to have something to write about. So go and, you know, read books, watch films, go to museums, go to galleries, do creative things to make, you know, to fill that creative well so that you have something to draw on later. That's all part of the work. Don't feel guilty about it. I used to feel guilty about going and doing fun stuff. They're like, no, this is part of your work. But I tell myself anyway.
Is there any, could we expect maybe a sequel or maybe a novel from another character's perspective in the future?
I haven't thought seriously about doing a sequel. I'd kind of like to, but just in a completely self-indulgent way, because I really miss the characters and I hang out with them again. Like I got really upset the night before the book was published. I got really emotional because it felt like they were leaving me, and you know, I wasn't going to be part of their little world anymore, and I really was going to miss them. Like to everybody else, when your book gets published, that's the beginning of it, but to the writer, that's the end. You can't, you know, be in that world anymore. And I got really, really sad because I was so attached to them. And so I think if I wrote anything else about them, I would just be too attached to them to let anything bad happen to them. And you have to be really mean to your characters to write a book, and I don't think I could do that to them now. So I'm not sure if it would be a good idea.
Yeah, that's actually very true.
Yeah, this might be a good time to open up to the audience. So, any questions? Oh, there's me.
Start
Oh,
writing.
Chris.
Oh, sorry, I'll go again. Were there any authors who inspired you to start writing?
Ooh. Well, obviously J.K. Rowling. I got back into reading children's books because of Harry Potter. And then I read one called A Gathering Light by Jennifer Donnelly. I think that was the first YA one I read, and I just thought, wow, this is amazing. I want to do this. But since then, I'll read just about anything. Like I really, really love Susan Nielsen, and she was a big inspiration because I read her books and I just thought, I want to write like her. She's amazing. And I loved her so much that I asked my editor to send her a copy of my book when the proofs came out. And I didn't really think she'd read it. I just thought it would be really cool to have one. She's in Canadian. So they sent her one, and she did read it, and she gave me a quote to put on the back. And I was like, so good. I was so pleased. And I love David Levithan, who else? Patrick Kenny, Keithan Leahy, of course. Mal Pete, Juno Dawson, Sarah Crossan, Brian Conahan, Charlie Ann McMillan. I just finished Deep Light by Frances Harding, and I thought it was amazing. Have you read any of that?
No.
I don't read loads of fantasy, so I picked it up thinking, I don't know. I really loved it. Try that one.
Any other questions, guys?
You write from like a twin's perspective, so are you a twin yourself, or do you just know people, or what inspired the twins in the story?
They're not based on real people, and I'm not a twin myself, but I find twins really interesting because I think like Finch and Brady, they're not just brother and sister, they're twins, and they're a double act, so their lives like completely revolve around each other. And I think that must be so weird if like your identity is bound up in being, you know, one half of a pair, because how do you know who you are on your own? Like I think it must be weird when you get to that age where people start dating for twins, because it's really the start of the process of separation, you know, and from then on, your lives are going to kind of go like that. And that's what all this is for Finch and Birdie. Like, it's the beginning of that, and Finch is starting to learn who he is without her and what he can be by himself. So I think it must be really interesting to be a twin.
That's really interesting. I'd actually love to know what your best piece of advice would be for aspiring authors, I guess.
Ooh, something I say all the time is be brave, not perfect. I think people get really hung up on producing a perfect, you know, perfect first draft or a perfect story, and they think that that's what writers do, and it's really and honestly, the more you hang out with writers and artists and creative people, the more you realize that A, everybody's first draft is rubbish, and B, the people who end up getting published are not necessarily the people who everyone thought were the best writers. I mean, they're all very talented, but it's the people, the thing that makes the difference is it's the people who will sit down in front of a computer for 2 years and are the people who get published. It's not the person who could create the most beautiful paragraph, because a beautiful paragraph is lovely, but it will not get you published. 2 years in front of a computer, blood, sweat, and tears, just might. So that's what makes the difference. So don't get hung up on perfect first draft.
I'd love to know what would you hope as the author that young people would take away from the story?
Ooh, I think if I could make my writing do anything, it would be to get across this idea that there's no such thing as weird. Like, everybody makes sense if you can just get inside their head. Like Finch, for example, comes across as really standoffish and a bit hostile. But when you know that he was once cruelly rejected by his best friend, then that makes complete sense. So, you know, there's no such thing as weird. Everybody is just behaving according to the internal logic of their experience. And it really helps you to understand people if you kind of bear that in mind.
Lovely, thanks, Kelly. Is there any other questions, guys? You feeling good? I'm just wondering, I suppose, if like what you're working on now, or if you can tell us a little bit about what's coming up, if there is something coming up.
Well, as I say, I'm always working on sort of 3 or 4. So I have one that's finished and my editor is working on at the minute. And I have one that I've just finished the full draft of, and I'm going to let my husband read it tomorrow. And he's the first person to see it, so I'm like really nervous. And I have a couple of others that I've just sort of halfway through or just started. But I never tell people what they're beforehand. A, because I'm a bit superstitious, and B, because I know that they can change so much by the time they're finished. So I kind of don't want to make any claims for them.
Sure. Well, we'll be keeping an eye out anyway, Kelly. We really enjoyed Flying Tips for Flightless Birds, so thanks a million. And hopefully we might read something again in the future and maybe speak to you again in the future. It would be lovely.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me, and your questions were brilliant, and you're all fantastic interviewers. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.